Welcome to Learn Breakdance for WordPress. I am JP, and we're going to talk about a setting in the global typography which may just ease up your workflow and free up so much time and make your design better. Something you may have never considered. I've not really used it, but after I got my head around it, it's a feature that I like to use, and that is the ratio aspect within the typography setting that is for global typography. Let's crack away. On my page, I have this section, which is going to be our preview section. All the HTML tags are here from H1 to H6, plus a paragraph element below it with text for our paragraph. I also brought in one of the pre-made sections from Breakdance, and we're going to see how this works in real time. What we need to do is go to our global settings. If you're not there yet, go to the top right corner and select Global Settings, and then select Typography. We're focusing on this little whippersnapper over here called Ratio. But before we talk about that, one thing we quickly have to talk about is the base size. If you leave the base size value empty, it's by default 16 pixels. Trust me on this. If you've worked a long time with this kind of thing, then you will know it is 16 pixels. But we will play around with it once we start playing around with the ratio. What this means, the 16 pixels, is that our paragraph text, this one over here, comes in at 16 pixels. What ratio does is that it multiplies your H6, your H5, and then your H4, and so on until H1 with a set ratio value, increasing it on that ratio. So you don't have to go and set all those values for the typography size for your HTML tags individually. You just assign a ratio. Let's begin with a ratio of 1 to 1. This will help you to understand how it works. Once I type in a ratio of 1, your math genius brain should tell you that all of your headings are going to be 16 pixels. Why? Because the ratio is 1 to 1, and our base size is 16 pixels, which means everything will be 16. Let's see if I speak the truth. I type in 1, and look at that. All the headings go down to 16 pixels, as well as this pre-made section. You can see everything is now 16 pixels. And that is because of the base size that is set to 16 by default. What happens with the ratio is when I increase it, let's go to 1.1. And I'll talk about that 0.1 soon. What happens is that H6, I think, is 1 to 1. H5 is 1.1, so 10% more than H6. H4 is another 10% more than H5, and H3 is more 10% than H4, so each one accumulates all the way to H1. There are two settings that are used here when we get to the ratio. One is 1.25, and the other one is 1.333. Why? Before we get to that, and there's a lot of before we get to that, let's just go to ratio and type in a value of 2, so you can see what's going to happen. Alrighty. And this is where you quickly realize that something like 2 exponentially becomes pretty big pretty quickly. So even at the ratio of 2, this doesn't work for us. So let's go backspace. Let's try 1.5. Even 1.5 is pretty big. You can see just from the 16 pixels that we start with very quickly, it runs up to this massive H1 heading. But if you're not going to be working with the H1 heading on your page, you look at the H2, and this may just be what you are going for. Then 1.5 is a very good ratio to work with. I did mention to you that developers actually like to use two ratios. The first one is 1.25. These ratios are inspired by musical intervals and classical typography. Can you believe it, right? So 1.25 is called the major third. This is a very popular one because it's very balanced and it's a gentle progression. Let's do that. I'll type in 1.25. You can see this is going to look very good across your page. Here we have the section, and I believe this is probably done on a 1.25 basis. The other one is 1.33 that you can also consider. 1.33 is called the perfect fourth, or 4/3. This one is a little bit stronger, and it has a notable contrast. So let's go for 1.33 and another 3 just for good measure. It doesn't make a difference. I can see that. And you'll see now this is a little bit bigger than the original one, but still really striking and grabs more attention to the headings. We could look at one more, which I will recommend, and that is 1.414. Yeah, how do you remember this? Just watch this video a few times and write down. 1.414 is the augmented fourth, and this is a good middle ground between really big headings and more balanced headings. So we go for 1.414, 1.414, and it's actually just 1.41. You can see now the headings get pretty big, but remember again, if you are working with a heading 2 for your sections, then you may want to go for this. Go for a 1.5, try something bigger. Just be aware that they get bigger much quicker the higher this number goes. So let's balance this one out with 1.25, which is the one that we started off with. We can see this section looks pretty nice. And that is what the ratio is going to do. So instead of having to go and change your headings all over your site individually every time, you just use the ratio to determine those values one go, and your site will adjust accordingly. Going back to the base size is something that I said we'll also talk about. Remember that the base size value by default is 16, which means if I type in 16 here, nothing should change. Let's keep our fingers crossed. That's exactly how everything looked before I type it in. So the default value, I'll clear this out and you will see nothing changes. It's 16 pixels. In my case, I often like to use a base size of 18 pixels. 16 used to be the standard. I'm levitating more and more towards 18 nowadays, purely because on mobile devices, it's often easier for people to read more text if it is an 18. So I go for the 18 to 20. And another thing that will bring that into consideration is the type of font you use. If you have a very small little font style, if you're using a font where the O's and the E's are smaller, you may want to increase the base size. Type in 18 within base size, and now you will note that not only does your base get bigger, but your ratio will also increase to the 18. So if I make that something very big, like 40, you'll see that the heading gets much bigger, much quicker. But your base size in rare conditions will go beyond 20. That will depend on the font. For me, I'm going to go with 18. I like this. To recap, with the ratio, you don't have to set the sizes of your HTML tags, actually your heading sizes. It is based on a ratio. It begins with your H6, and then from there on, if it's at 1.25, every time it will increase with the size of 25% compounded, which means H3 is 25% larger than H4, well, 125% in total, and H1 will be 25% larger than H1. 1.25 is a good way to go, 1.33 a little bit bigger, 1.41. And after that, you can just make up numbers. It really doesn't actually matter because the sizes are based on ratio and not hard set pixels. That explains what the ratio in the global typography is all about, a really great feature. Remember to subscribe if you want to learn more about Breakdance and all the hidden features. From me, JP, until next time.